That's locked out of the room right now, so same boat.
It'd be worse if I tried to lock them out, so.
That's true. Give them a little bit of catnip and they generally leave us alone, but yeah. Alrighty, so yeah, we'll get started. So we're the D211 Democrats, basically a high school organization built by high school students for high school students. Just before we start, I want to give a really big thank you to Patrick. He's been really, really helpful for us. We've all been a part of his fellowship program, which is really, really helpful for any high school students. It just kind of teaches you how to work in a campaign. I believe he's going to put the link in the chat. Also, Sean Casten's group has an internship, and yeah, so I would check that out as well. We just want to get involved as much as we can in any way to make sure that people up and down the ticket can get elected. I'm sure Maggie Trevor has volunteer stuff as well. So yeah, just try to get involved as much as you can. But that being said, let's get into it. So starting with Representative Casten, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do in Congress? Kind of give us a little bit of an introduction.
Sure. So about a year ago, I spoke to the Hinsdale High School Conservative Students Club, and I feel like in the interest of being fair and equal and balanced, I should basically probably say the same things to you guys. And I actually said that in a really positive sense, because I said to them, I don't want to assume anything about your values based on how you identify politically, because there's a huge danger there. My friend David Roberts, who's a writer at Vox, if you've not read his stuff, read it. He's one of the best political writers out there. I think we've been friends for a long time, and he's coined this phrase of tribal epistemology. You know, epistemology is the study of truth, and tribal epistemology is the idea that if you define your truth not by some universal truth, but by things that people in your tribe say is true, that's how you basically abandon the Enlightenment. And that so much of our political conversation right now is driven by that tribal epistemology. And when I said that to the Conservative Students Club, I pointed out that all the values that I used to think were really important to me are now Democratic values. When I was in high school, they seemed like Republican values. I don't think my values changed, but I don't want to assume that because of the letter you hang after your name, we have common values. And I think one of the most interesting things about my class in Congress, I have run for a grand total of 1 office in my entire elected life. If you want to know how to run for office, ask me. I'm batting 1,000. Never failed. But having spent 20 years before that as an engineer and as a CEO, I never really thought about politics. I thought about politics in the sense that I voted. I thought about politics in the sense that I have a lot of strong opinions. But all of my experience was developed in a different milieu. And I'm now part of this freshman class. It's the biggest freshman class since Watergate. It's the, more women than any class since Watergate, more people of color, well, more women than any class ever, more people of color than any class ever, more LGBT than any class ever, more Native Americans than any class ever, more Muslims than any class ever. Like all those things that our class gets talked about. What it doesn't get talked about as much is I'm virtually certain we have a higher proportion of people who never ran for any elected office before this office. And that's not in any way to criticize folks in politics, because there's a real value to that. But I think that what's really fun about the class I serve in is that we don't think about things in the ways you think about things politically. We think about things in the sense of how do you get things done. Because if I don't mean that to criticize politics, but if you went home and said to your parents tonight, I guess you are home, but if you were at school, and you said, Mom and Dad, I've divided the entire high school into the jocks and the nerds. And I want to let you know that I did a paper today and it had an equal number of jocks and nerds on it. Like, would your parents be like, yay, good for you? Or would they be like, that is a completely stupid sentence. And yet we have these conversations in politics about, well, are you bipartisan? How is that any different, right? There's nothing wrong with jocks. There's nothing wrong with nerds. But what does that have to do with why you're really here, right? And I think what I think is both optimistic and discouraging about this moment is that if you ask the American people, certainly if you ask voters in this district, what is your opinion on the issues that matter? Climate change, gun control, our healthcare system, the US's role in the world, should we be, a pro-market economy? If you ask people questions like that, what you find is that there is overwhelming agreement among the American people. If instead you ask the question of saying, do you agree with Donald Trump that? Do you agree with Nancy Pelosi that? You come to the conclusion that the country is very partisan and at odds with each other. And that doesn't, I think, number one, that's a distorted view of where the American psyche is because we frame the questions in strange ways. But it's also, and this gets to the depressing part, that I am a Democrat because every value I hold dear is central to the Democratic Party. And if the Democratic Party all decided to become Nazis, I would not remain a Democrat. The Republican Party at this point has, I don't even know what their platform is, right? They didn't even put a platform at their convention. They just said, we'll do whatever Trump says. And the party I grew up with that said, like, markets are really important ways to solve problems, and competitive markets are great, but sometimes competitive markets are antithetical to being pro-business because no business wants to be in a competitive market. That's not a Republican Party view anymore. I grew up with the idea that the US should be a bully for the rule of law and democracy on the global stage and a defender of the post-World War II order. For all practical purposes, that's not a view of the Republican Party anymore. I grew up with the idea that if you care about not blowing massive deficits and holes in the budget, you needed to sort of look out for where you are. That made you a Republican. That's not a value of the Republican Party anymore. First election I ever voted in, I voted for a Republican because Tipper Gore, Al Gore's wife, didn't want me to be able to buy an NWA record because it had an F-bomb in it, and she wanted to put labels on it, and I wasn't old enough to listen to those dirty words. And if I told you today that there was a politician who thinks that your fragile psyches can't deal with, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, would you guess that was a Democrat or a Republican saying that, right? And all of that, I don't mean that to sound partisan, but I think the challenge of this job is how do you stay true to your values, even if that means running afoul of ways that people talk about politics. And I'll leave you just before opening up for your questions that I carry this little card around with me that Steny Hoyer gave us that I think is the wisest thing ever said about how to do this job. And this was written in 1774 by Edmund Burke. And I'm going to read the whole thing. It's a little bit antiquated language, but I think it's just a great description of the job. Certainly it ought to be the happiness and glory of a representative to live in the strictest union, the closest correspondence, and most unreserved communication with his constituents. Their wishes ought to have great weight with him. I apologize for the pronouns. This was 1774. Their opinion, high respect, their business, unremitted attention. It is his duty to sacrifice his repose, his pleasures, his satisfactions to theirs, and above all, ever and in all cases, to prefer their interest to his own. But, this is the key part, his unbiased opinion, his mature judgment, his enlightened sense of conscience, he ought not to sacrifice you to any man or to any set of men living. These he does not derive from your pleasure, no, nor from the law and the Constitution. They are a trust from Providence, for the abuse of which he is deeply answerable. Your representative owes you not his industry only, but his judgment, and he betrays, instead of serving you, if he sacrifices it to your opinion. And to your question about what the job is, democracy at core is a covenant. It's a covenant between those of us who seek to hold office to explain with absolute crystal clarity what is our moral compass, what is our ethical line, how do we make decisions, and what are the things that it doesn't matter whether or not your constituent's opinion changes. That's who you are. Because if you're not true to that, you shouldn't hold this office, because that's what all of us are. And then the voters in turn, you have to trust that they will make a decision that if all candidates are honest with them, they will make an honest assessment in the ballot box. And if we do that well, democracy works. The moment when you see someone running for office and you say, what is your morals? And they say, let me tell you about my religion. Say, no, that's not the question I asked. The minute you say, tell me a time you stood up for your morals, and they say, let me tell you about a time that I was bipartisan. I say, no, that's not the question I asked. Because there's lots of slippery ways we elide that question of what really matters to us. But we want a participatory democracy. We want an informed electorate, and that's a two-way street. And so that's my take on the job, and happy to answer your questions with the time we have remaining.
Well, thanks. That was really great. If any of you all have questions, just private message either Lamia, me, which is Gabe, or Anya, and then we'll make sure we ask Sean Casten to answer them. But before we do, we had a couple prepared. So you talked a little bit about the beginning on working kind of with the other side and working for a common goal. We know that the House of Representatives is worked mostly within committees. Can you just walk us through what committees you're on and the daily life of a freshman senator and how you go about your business on Capitol Hill?
So I'm on the Financial Services Committee, the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, and the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. The Financial Services and the Science Committee are what's called committees of jurisdiction, which means there are branches of the government that we have authority over deciding their funding, oversight, what have you. So on science, we oversee basically all scientific research in this country. NASA, NIH, Department of Energy, USDA has a research program. We oversee those programs and then make sure that it's being done well. We had, sometimes it's a super cool committee. We had when NASA took those pictures of the black hole, we were we sort of had a first peek and got to meet with all the scientists who put that together and understand how that went together. Sometimes it's controversial when Trump pulled out a Sharpie and changed the direction of a hurricane. We were the committee of oversight that had to look in and talk to NOAA about, how was your research corrupted and what did you do about that? Financial Services is a more high profile committee because we oversee essentially anything related to money. The Treasury Department, we have Steve Mnuchin in all the time, Jay Powell from Treasury, making sure that these huge amounts of money we're pumping into the economy right now have appropriate controls and levers on them. That committee also has oversight over most of our housing sector. It has oversight over the SEC, so how public companies, what they're responsible for. The Climate Committee is not a committee of jurisdiction, which in some ways makes it more interesting, because when you're on a committee of jurisdiction, you don't have the ability to ask questions outside of your committee of jurisdiction. So I'm 20 years in the energy industry. I have a lot of ability to ask and influence questions around the financing of energy companies, around what we're going to direct public companies to disclose as far as their climate exposure. But I have no jurisdiction to ask questions around forward markets for energy, because that, of course, is subject to the Agriculture Committee. I have no jurisdiction to affect energy policy, because that's done through the Energy and Commerce Committee. The Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, we were tasked to come up with climate policy that would get us to where the scientists know we need to get to. And because we're not a committee of jurisdiction, we could look at the entire body of Congress and what we need to do, and then make recommendations that are then referred to those committees. So those are the three committees. They keep me pretty busy. On any given day when we are in Congress, probably anywhere from a third to a half of your time is with respect to committees. Another third to a half is meetings in your office, constituent services. People come in, they want to talk to you about various things. Another third to a half is trying to raise money to get reelected, which of course you still have to do because the way our campaign finance system is structured. And then there's another third to a half that is, caucus meetings, working with leadership, and actually going to the floor and voting. And yeah, those add up to more than a day, but the days are pretty long.
Can you walk us through the HEROES Act and its benefits compared to the HEALS Act, please?
Um, so it's a $3 trillion bill. The HEALS Act is basically a pile of hot garbage, and it's not really worth talking about. Here's what matters. The U.S. economy on an annualized basis, GDP is down by 33%. We have never fallen by that fast in our history since we've begun reporting data. We have never seen an increase in unemployment at the rate, we went from 3% unemployment to 12% unemployment in a matter of months. We have never seen it increase that quickly. GDP is about $21 trillion. So if you sit there and say, okay, we had a 33% collapse in a $21 trillion economy, just keeping our head level with water, right, means that every time we put $3 trillion into the economy, which is a massive number, we buy 6 months of time to get the public health crisis under control. What we did in the CARES Act and then what we did again in the HEROES Act was to buy time for the White House to get the public health crisis under control, and they have utterly, absolutely failed. So what we did in the HEROES Act, which is the one that hasn't passed yet, was everything from trying to deal with the fact that the states are falling apart. If you want to defund the police, don't vote for the HEROES Act, because the police departments are funded by state and municipalities who are all running out of money. And so we provided $1 trillion to get more money to the states to cover those gaps. Hospitals have, because they shut down their elective surgeries, but they had a huge surge in patients from COVID, we had to make sure that they were reimbursed, could keep the doors open so we could keep our public health growing. With unemployment down up as high as it is, expanding unemployment insurance, providing resources for businesses to keep employees on payroll even as they're running through, expansions in Medicaid, because Medicaid is available for people whose income is too low and don't have employer provided health insurance. And so we provided expansions for that. Expansions in food assistance. We had $60 billion in there for food assistance. Moratoriums on evictions and foreclosures, because if you lost your job through no fault of your own, but you worked for JCPenney and no one's shopping retail anymore, how are you going to pay your rent? You can quibble with, did we do exactly the right thing? But that's what we did. What the counter proposal is, and number one, like, just go to Schoolhouse Rock. The House passes a bill, the Senate passes a bill, you go to conference and you negotiate. The Senate hasn't passed anything. That there is no counter proposal that's actually been proven to pass the Senate. The HEALS Act is rumored to maybe be passable, but I don't know if it is. But what's in there, we had $1 trillion to the states. Their counter was zero. We had $25 billion to cover the cost that the post office requested to cover their higher costs from dealing with COVID. Their counter was zero. We had $60 billion in food assistance. Their counter was $250,000 for the whole country for food assistance, $250,000. We had $3.6 billion to provide everybody with the option to vote at home, so you don't have to risk your health if you go to the polling booth. Their counter was zero. Now they did include increased deductions for business lunches. It's not a serious bill, and it doesn't deserve serious consideration. And this sort of goes to the point I was saying. It sounds partisan to say that, right? But if you sat down at the Thanksgiving dinner table and you had some cousin who showed up and started throwing food around the house and saying, I hate Thanksgiving, this is a horrible holiday, and I hate America, like, you wouldn't invite them to sit at the big kids table. The HEALS Act does not deserve discussion around adults.
All right, so thanks. The next question that we had kind of relates back to how you mentioned how bills buy time. So we kind of want you to walk through the successes of the last bill that you guys were able to pass, specifically with like small businesses and buying time for our economy not to be crushed as hard as it was.
Yeah, so we've actually done, I think, 4 or 5 bills, because there was and I'm forgetting the names of all of them, but the first one was to provide funding for research into testing and treatments and vaccines. The second one, the Families First Act, provided money so that, like, you know, if you had to take extended sick leave, resources so that your employer could give you longer sick leave time. For example, if you tested positive and had to quarantine and couldn't go to work. Extended short-term disability if you got sick and had to take time off, so that your employer didn't have to decide between, do I lay you off or do I let you go? When we moved into the CARES Act, the big one, we essentially tried to correct for some of the mistakes made in 2008, because we want to make sure that businesses don't go away during the pandemic, but we also want to make sure that the resources we provide to those businesses are used for the employees of those businesses, not to pay dividends to shareholders. Because you had, like, in 2008, airlines took all this money, then declared bankruptcy, and bankruptcy got rid of their pensions and then came back, and the employees got hosed. So that big PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program, was done to say, we'll give companies grants based on their payroll expense times 3 months. And as long as they use at least 75% of the money we give them to cover their payroll, that's a grant. If they use less than that, they got to pay it back as a loan. So it was sort of to try to sort of do that through. We subsequently expanded the PPP. We tweaked the rules a little bit because, frankly, we made some mistakes. We funneled the PPP through the Small Business Authority, which went through banks. And what we found after the first round was that the money disproportionately flowed to companies with existing banking relationships. And so a lot of smaller businesses that maybe didn't have banking relationships, but still employed a lot of people, were left out. So we modified and tweaked. And if we were doing it all over again, we probably would not go through the SBA at all, because there's some other ideas that evolved. But put those things together. Along with that, hugely expanded testing, changed some of the reimbursement rules so that if you go to get a test, you don't have to pay for it, whether you're on Medicare or Medicaid or private insurance, to make sure that can all get done. And then expanded food assistance, what I mentioned, the unemployment insurance. I could go on and on. I mean, these are $3 trillion, but in general, what that all did was bought us 6 months.
All right, so I'm being told that you only have time for one more question. So I guess we will go to a fairly pressing issue for the youth and a committee that you're on, which is the climate. Can you just walk us through a couple pieces of legislation that you've either co-sponsored or introduced that would help mitigate the effects of climate change?
I can walk you through the specific legislation I've done, although it gets really wonky in a hurry. So let me maybe take congressional privilege and frame the big picture of what we should be thinking about. If you understand both the science of climate change, the details of our energy policy, which are really complicated, and the ways that the public and private sectors deploy capital, then you are qualified to really deal with climate change. If you don't understand all three of those, you're really dangerous, because we do not have time to get this wrong. We could have fiddled at the edges and gradually tweaked 30 years ago. At this point, we're really out of time. In my lifetime, the atmospheric CO2 concentration has increased almost 30%, having been largely stable for the 100,000 years before I was born. If we eliminated all CO2 emissions tomorrow, we still have another 2 feet of sea level rise baked into the system. If we don't build seawalls, that means that within your lifetime, Miami Beach is gone. Lower Manhattan is gone. The Marshall Islands are gone. Significant parts of Boston are gone. I'm not trying to make you depressed. I'm saying that is the reality of where we are. We don't have time to fiddle around. So what that means, but as against that, we have an enormous, really, really positive opportunity, because virtually everything that you do to lower CO2 emissions also saves you money. And so you create wealth, right? If you put a solar panel on your roof and stop buying electricity from the grid, You had to come up with money for the solar panel, but once that's up, your marginal cost of electricity is zero, and you've displaced dirtier power off the grid. Ditto for a wind turbine or a geothermal plant, or if you put more efficient windows in your home, or if you buy an electric vehicle, you stop buying gasoline. And that actually creates some really good challenges for our society, because we are going to create so much wealth in this conversion that we should really be thinking about how to equitably allocate that wealth through society. Because the way that our energy system is structured right now, all of that gain will accrue to consumers. The price of energy will fall, and we will lose the incentive to invest in more of those assets, and we'll lose the incentive to conserve, which is totally not the way that anybody thinks about climate, but it's the reality, and it's actually what we've experienced over the last 20 years. The carbon intensity of the US electric grid has fallen by 25%, and the price of power has fallen by 6%. It's getting really hard to finance new power projects. That's an awesome problem, but it's a problem, right? And it's totally the opposite of what you sometimes hear: we can't afford to make this transition. I told one of my colleagues across the aisle that saying we can't afford to invest in climate change makes as much economic sense as saying you don't want to travel to Denver because you're afraid of shark attacks. He thought it was rude, but I felt like he needed some education. But what that means that we need to do is, number one, we need to make a massive commitment to increasing the efficiency of our society, energy use per dollar of GDP. If we got to the level of Switzerland, we would use half as much energy for the same amount of economic activity, which means we'd be a lot richer. And Switzerland has the same access to talent and technology that we have. They've just done a better job of getting rid of some of the distortions. The amount we subsidize the fossil fuel industry in this country is roughly equal to the entire US defense budget. $650 billion a year we subsidize the fossil fuel industry. Don't tell me this is a market driven when we're distorting the market by that much. So double the efficiency. Number two, we've got to do a huge amount of R&D to figure out how to make things that we don't know how to make without fossil fuels. Because we use fossil fuel for energy, but we also use it as a chemical input. We don't know how to make fertilizer without natural gas. We don't know how to make steel without coke, or silicon, or cement. And there are interesting early technologies, but we've got to do that R&D, because if you don't have that R&D, you cannot make a credible argument to how we're going to get to zero CO2 as a society. Because I don't know how you feed 7 billion people without fertilizer, right? And then the last thing we got to do, if we do both of those, and if we do them all tomorrow, we still got 2 feet of sea level rise coming. And so the last thing we got to do is that we have to figure out how to get back to 330 parts per million in the atmosphere, which means going back to 1985, roughly. And that's going to be massive agricultural changes, because agriculture has the potential to significantly increase the carbon retention in our soils, and likely the deployment of a lot of negative emission technologies that suck carbon out of the atmosphere and store it somewhere safely. And that's going to be really expensive. But remember, the first step is going to generate a ton of money, right? And so as long as we're serious about the problem, as long as we listen to scientists, and as long as we tell every single person who says, I don't believe in climate change, you do not get to sit at the big kid table. You get to sit with the people with the tinfoil hats who also don't believe in gravity, because the adults have work to do. And if we do that, we'll leave a nice stable planet for you guys and your kids to follow. We'll be a lot wealthier. Let's get started.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We way overthought how many questions to write. So we hope to have you again. Yeah, so we hope we can have you again at another point to talk some more. So thank you very much for coming.
Absolutely. Stay safe, all. Take care.
Okay, so our next speaker slash person taking questions is Maggie Trevor, who is the Illinois 54th state representative candidate. and I'll let her just take it from there. Just what is she running for? What are you doing to help us out? So yeah.
Thank you. A little bit about me. Yes, my name is Maggie Trevor, and I am running for the 54th State House seat. This is, unlike Sean Casten, I'm not batting 1,000. I ran for this office in 2018, and I lost by 43 votes out of 45,000 that were cast. And just to put that in perspective, there are about 30 people on this call right now. So that's 2/3 of what I needed to win. And if you ever have any questions or any doubt that your vote can count and make a huge difference, my 2018 race should convince you that that's the case. A little about me. I was born and raised in this district. I went to District 15 schools, Central Road and Carl Sandburg and Rolling Meadows. I didn't go to 211. I went to 214. I'm a graduate of Rolling Meadows High School. So my brothers, however, my brother and my cousins went to Friends, so I have a connection with 211. I did grow up in this community. And a little about my family. My mother was a political activist in this community for many, many, many years. One of the early experiences I had was going to meetings with her, political meetings with her, and I learned a lot and saw what was going on in the 60s and the 70s to make change, a meaningful change in the Northwest suburbs. The Northwest suburbs that you're growing up in many ways is a much better place to live than it was. It was a good place to live and a good place to go to school when I was a kid, but it was a very different place. And a lot of the activists fought long and hard battles to make this a strong, diverse community where we live and work now. And I never imagined in my wildest dreams that I would ever run for office of any sort. I never saw myself as that person, that kind of person. I'm basically an introvert. Although I was a college, my background is I started off as a scientist. I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry and worked as a medicinal chemist for a few years. And then went to graduate school at University of Chicago, got a master's and PhD in political science, which sounds like a huge leap, but basically I was a math person. And I do applied statistics. I taught at University of Iowa for a number of years. I taught, interestingly enough, political parties. My scholarly interest was understanding political socialization and why people become Democrats and Republicans. I'm a published author on the topic. And I trained to be a pollster, basically. I trained to be behind the scenes person. And after I taught at Iowa, I went into the business world and I did market research, which is basically polling for the business world. And most of that experience is in the healthcare industry. I know a lot about the healthcare marketplace. I've worked in many different capacities in that. I moved back to Rolling Meadows, and actually I'm sitting in the house I grew up in, which was a little weird at first, but I'm kind of getting used to it now. Never in a million years imagined that I would do this, but in 2015 I found myself in the position of starting my own business. Healthcare market research consulting practice. And as a business person, and on an emotional level, this is the house I grew up in. This is the community I grew up in, and I have an attachment to it. I love the Chicago area. But it's also a really, really good place to do business for a number of reasons. As much as you hear people talk about how taxes are terrible in Illinois, it's actually, from a business person's standpoint, it's a pretty good place to run a business. It's also, in terms of infrastructure and geographic location, fantastic for what I do. I'm a 10-minute cab ride away from O'Hare. I can visit a client in any part of the country like that. And that's one of the great advantages of the Chicago area. It is a good place to do business. So I was settling into this life and getting involved in the community a little bit, learning a little bit about who was representing me at various levels. And this was 2015 that I moved back in. When I found out about Tom Morrison and what was going on in the 54th district, and in particular what was going on in the 211 school district, I was appalled. in large part because there was somebody who was, the person who was representing me was using social issues as a wedge in a way that I found offensive. And doing it in the community that I grew up in the community where through my childhood, I watched so many people work so hard for so many years to bring about positive change. And to see that threatened is just something I can't abide by. Now, given that I'm not just running because I don't like the person in office, I'm also running because I think I can do a better job. I do have a background in healthcare. I do have a background in education. I know how public university systems work. I know how the healthcare marketplace works. I also know, because I'm a consultant, because I've worked with high-level executives through most of my career, I know how to talk to people. I know how to reason with people. I know how to get powerful people to change course. It's, you know, I know how to negotiate. And I saw that lacking in our current representative, who has made a point of not cooperating, particularly on budget issues, for his entire tenure there. And what that translates to in terms of the legislature is that the interests of the 54th district don't have a voice down there, because if you don't cooperate, you don't get anything done. So I have basically put my business on hold for a while to do this. And like I said, I got on the ballot in 2018, and I also want to add, I got on the ballot more or less by myself. This is a gerrymandered district, and it was drawn to be a Republican district. And there was a belief that a Democrat could not win in this district. And because I'm a political scientist, I was actually able to look at election numbers, population numbers. And since I grew up here, I knew what some of the trends were in terms of population shifts. And I knew that, although it was a long shot, that a Democrat could win. And so I got myself on the ballot. I knocked on 5,000 doors in the fall of 2017 and got myself on the ballot. And the rest is history. Eventually, I was the Democratic nominee. About this time in 2018, people noticed that I was running a campaign that actually had a chance of winning, and it became one of the focal points in the state that year. And a very large amount of money was spent on both sides, and I lost by 43 votes. So, but I'm trying again, and I'm hopefully will be successful this time. I'm confident that I can be successful. Turnout is the key. And like I said, there are 30-something people on this call, and that's 2/3 of the number I need to get me over the top. I would love to answer questions that you've got.
Thank you so much. We know your opponent is not pro-choice and anti-woman. Can you give us the compare and contrast between the two of you?
Yes, I am pro-choice. I will caveat this. I was raised Catholic. I was, my mother was a member of St. Colette's over on Meadow Drive. So I do appreciate the religious significance of that position, but it is a religious position. And I feel that a woman's right to choose, that women can never be truly equal in this society unless they have bodily autonomy, and that they can control their own destinies. And that needs to be a woman's choice. So I think that is a critical difference between myself and my opponent. I am also a strong proponent for the Equal Rights Amendment. I simply believe that your destiny in life should not be determined by your gender, and that we need to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to succeed in this society. And I think that the Equal Rights Amendment is critical of that. I also, some of the other key contrasts between Tom Morrison and myself have to do with rights of women in the workplace. I believe that we should be pursuing equal pay for equal work. One of the key pieces to that is limiting the ability for prospective employers to ask for salary information. And I've run into that in my own career, is women are very often on a different trajectory from very, very early on in their careers, because if they face discrimination early on, they very often start off at lower level jobs that pay significantly less, and they spend their lifetimes trying to catch up in the difference, and very often don't. And I have seen that in the workplace. But again, my key on that is that we are equals in society. We should have equal opportunity, and it's an aspirational goal at this point, and we need to make sure that we make Illinois a leader in this.
All right. So, well, thank you. That was like very, compare and contrast. I think it's been a big issue, at least for me, with Tom Morrison, and I think it is with a lot of young people in this country, is women's right to choice, which is a broad topic, and we're going to be going even broader now. So we've had a couple of questions that have just popped into my chat, and a lot of them are focusing on what can we do at the state level to create change. A couple of examples would be like, what can we do with healthcare? What can we do with, here, sorry, let me pull it back up. Oh, what can we do with like campaign finance reform to make elections fair, as you kind of talked about gerrymandering at the state level?
Yeah, those are three very separate things and three very dear things to me. I could talk about healthcare for the entire hour, and in fact, I just got off another Zoom call where I did talk about healthcare for the entire hour. I am committed to accessible, affordable healthcare, and there's a lot we can do at the state level. Insurance is one of those things that is regulated at the state level. States don't have jurisdiction over all plans. For instance, Medicare is a federal program, and the state has nothing to do with it. But exchange plans, Medicaid, a lot of different types of insurance plans, and in particular, insurance that covers low to middle income people disproportionately tends to be regulated by the state. And even if, for instance, the Affordable Care Act goes away at the federal level, there are things that we can do at the state level to make sure that we still have a functioning exchange, that we don't have discrimination based on pre-existing conditions. Basically, we could put in place at the state level a lot of the things that are currently in place at the federal level. And in fact, there's some movements to expand on that. For instance, there's a proposal, Pritzker has laid the groundwork actually this past term, and hasn't fully gotten much coverage for this, to make Medicaid a more viable option to use as a public option. And there we still have a lot of work to do. Medicaid right now has some issues in that there isn't enough capacity in the system as is, and we need to increase the number of providers who take it. We need to also make sure right now with the Affordable Care Act, if you're not enrolled in Medicaid, for everybody who makes up to 400% of the federal poverty level, they qualify for subsidies for plans, which helps make healthcare more affordable. But there's a cliff you fall off of once you earn that 401%. There is a feasibility study going on at the state level right now looking at helping with state subsidies to try and make that more affordable. We can regulate healthcare, the providers and insurance companies at the state level to try and get insurance premiums under review and under some control. And that's a touchy, careful thing. We also want to make sure that we don't go down a regulatory path that leads us into provider shortages or hospital bed shortages or things like that. It takes a lot of thought and study to be able to do that correctly. So there are lots of things on the healthcare front. On campaign finance reform, actually Illinois has a lot of campaign finance rules in place right now. But we're also in this federal environment where essentially the Citizens United was overturned, which has just opened the floodgates of money in American politics. That needs to change at the federal level. But we do have campaign finance reform and a reasonable amount of transparency at the state level, but we still have abuses. And one of the reasons why we have abuses is even though we have the regulation, we don't have very good enforcement. And we need to enforce the regulations that we have right now more rigorously. the State Board of Elections, I feel their enforcement arm is not adequately funded. There was a third item in your question too, and I'm blanking on it now. I apologize. It was
Gerrymandering. Healthcare. Yes.
gerrymandering and ethics reform. Yeah,
Yeah.
I am for a bipartisan commission to draw legislative lines. I think that's really important. The League of Women Voters, if you go to their website, actually has a position paper on it that I think is a very good set of guidelines for the state to go about. It needs to be bipartisan. You can't really do nonpartisan, but you got to balance. That's a little bit of a myth in this. Even if you basically draw it by computer, there have been studies that show that you can get very different outcomes depending on, for instance, if you have a square state, which corner you started when you start drawing those lines. There's always going to be some partisanship. There are pressures in there, but you need to have a balance, and you need to have a commission to look at that. In terms of ethics reform in general, I think, again, enforcement is a real key. I think we need to change the rules with regard to lobbying, as well as political contributions. I mean, you see this scandal right now with to influence legislation, to regulate them. And so we need, not only in terms of lobbying reform, but also limiting their contributions.
Okay. That was great. Another question I've gotten, I think 3 times now, has to do with kind of the BLM movement and the somewhat separate movement of defunding the police and ending racist policing policies. What can you do at the state level to help fix that? Or what do you plan to do?
Well, I think one of the keys is making sure that we treat the law enforcement profession as we need to license it. Basically, we need to make sure that that cops that are dismissed for cause don't just pick up and move over to the next town and get a job, which is kind of what's been going on for a long time. We need to have some kind of licensing and reporting. We also need to make sure, and in terms of defunding the police, it's a term I actually don't like, because I think a lot of the things that we need to do to improve our police forces and make them more responsive to the communities may actually involve funding them. Providing training, providing continuous training, like we do, for instance, with the medical profession. In order to keep licenses, they have to continually be trained. We need to also fund social services properly, and I kind of think that's a little bit what the defunding rhetoric tries to get at, but being more specific about it is that we do not adequately fund a lot of the social services that we need to help people in the communities. And we are then essentially asking police to clean up the mess that results. We need to adequately fund mental health services. We need to adequately fund other social services. And we need to make sure that we have people in the communities who are properly trained to deal with a variety of different problems that we have in the community, respond to these things, not just the cops, not just the police. We need to make sure that we don't ask the police to do things that they're not trained to do. I also think we need to keep an eye on the militarization of police as well. And that's a problem that I've seen growing through almost my whole lifetime. I remember in the 70s, a TV show called SWAT, and suddenly every police department had a SWAT team, including Rolling Meadows. It really isn't appropriate. And I think that's escalated in recent years with the selling of surplus military equipment to the police. Things that have no place when it comes to patrolling a civilian population. But given that, I also want to make sure that we understand that even in our own communities, there are things that we're doing right. Rolling Meadows has had off and on a community center in the southern part of Rolling Meadows that has done a lot of work with the community. Unfortunately, in 2008, that facility was cut because of the budget crisis, and that actually, I think the one thing that they could do differently now, although it hasn't been done differently, is make sure that they're reviving it, but it's still under the police budget. And in terms of defunding the police, I think moving that particular service out from under the line item of the police is really important, because I think if, you know, when we hit hard times and need to cut, if you have the police making the decision on the social service, whether to cut social services or patrol services, that's the choice that they're making, and which is why those kinds of services tend to get cut. So yes, we need to fund, we need to properly fund the services that will basically minimize the impact on police.
Sorry, just another follow-up on that. Somebody asked, how about police unions, and just, you can take it more generally. How do we make sure unions stay strong and healthy to protect workers, but also don't become overbearing and the complete controlling factor?
Well, that's actually, I mean, this is one of the, I want to say, the faults of a democratic process is unions elect their leaders. I am strongly committed to protecting the rights of workers to unionize and bargain collectively for wages and safe working conditions. And just because we don't like all the unions doesn't mean that they don't have a right to exist, or we don't like the union leaders. And I'm not sure there's anything we can do to prevent them from electing people you or I might not like. Other than making sure that they have enough resources, or they're able to operate and campaign for those seats in a public way. You know, I think specifically, there are a lot of people right now who are not happy with what's going on with the Chicago Police Union. Regardless of the personal views of the leader of the police union, he still needs to operate and bargain with the city in the same, you know, over the same issues as anybody else. But as a human being, he's entitled to his personal beliefs, whether we like him or not. But I'm not going to point to him as a reason why we need to become a right to work state, or why we shouldn't have public sector unions, even though I don't agree with them on many issues.
Okay, thank you. Kind of shifting, I wouldn't say onto a lighter topic, but onto climate change. There was a fairly recent study that came out by American Progress, and it basically said if you do everything at the federal level, it still won't be enough, and we have to enact policies at the local and state level to reach the goals at where we need to be at. I know you worked at the super local level before. Just what would you be doing at the state level to better Illinois in the climate perspective?
Well, I'm a proponent of the Clean Energy Jobs Act. I think it's going to be a little bit tough given the current climate, but I think it's an important piece of legislation. I think it gets us closer to where we need to be faster, but it also, I think, provides an engine for which to help create jobs in the state. And I think Sean Casten talked about it far more eloquently than I ever could. That is his area of expertise. But basically, it's the future. And not only is it's the future in terms of our infrastructure, and we are in an economic crisis. We're going to need to do things to stimulate our economy, just like, you know, if we look back to the 1930s and what was necessary to get us out of the Great Depression, you know, we are going to have some kind of public spending to stimulate the economy. Let's do it to build the infrastructure that we know we're going to need to deal with climate change. And the Clean Air Energy Jobs Act in Illinois is one of those things. Another issue that is near and dear to my heart is transportation. I'm on the traffic committee for the city of Rolling Meadows, and specifically, I'm the bicycle and pedestrian liaison. So I actually don't go to every meeting. I go to those where it's necessary for that kind of input. And frankly, most of the issues that come before the traffic committee actually don't involve that. But I do comment a lot and advocate a lot for, within the city of Rolling Meadows, for bike paths. And it's an important thing for people to hear that not everybody relies on a car or should rely on a car to get from point A to point B within the suburbs. And it's one of the faults that we have as a place to live. And when I was growing up, believe it or not, public transportation around here was actually better and more comprehensive than it is now. And that's a problem because there are more people here now, far more people living in the suburbs now than when I was a kid. So we do have the population to support it. We need the will to do it. And that is going to involve federal dollars. There's only so much we can do at the state, but we can do some state stuff. And like, for instance, some of the grants that we have around the city of Rolling Meadows to build bike paths are state grants. But it needs to be we need a more comprehensive solution, and bikes aren't going to get us there. We need investment in public transportation that, because not everybody can ride a bike. But we need that investment, and we need it also in ways that people try to get around now, as opposed to the way they did it in the 1950s. So now, for instance, if I want to get to Evanston by public transportation, I have to go into the city and then back out again. So we need to think about that. We need to have some kind of ring transportation to try and really cut down on the use of cars.
All right, thanks. Just a couple more questions and then we can let you go. But you kind of alluded to in your last statement about state funds. And I know because of COVID-19, they've become very, very limited, which obviously limits the amount you can do. I also do know that there's talk about restructuring our tax system. And I was wondering if you could mention on that and just how can we get more tax revenue and make sure the rich pay their fair share to do these projects that you're talking about?
Yeah, I am in favor of the fair tax amendment. I think it is a necessary tool, and it's just a tool essentially for us to deal with the budget issue. There's been a lot of hype and misinformation in TV commercials these days, but basically the fair tax amendment is just going to give us the ability to set tax brackets. I think that we need to, from that, and that is really, really necessary for us to address our problems. It's not the only thing that's necessary. COVID has blown a great big hole in our budget. And we're in a situation now, and again, Sean talked about it a little bit, where we are really, really dependent right now on the federal government to help us plug this hole. And we're not alone in this situation. Every single state in the country is in this situation. And if the federal government does not come through with this, we have very, very big problems. Coupled with, if the fair tax amendment doesn't pass, we really do, we're going to have to face some very, very hard choices in the state. I hope that even if nothing gets passed in the fall, if we have a change in Congress and a change in presidential leadership, can eventually make ourselves a little bit, move ourselves a little bit farther down that path. We were on a path to higher funding levels of public education. We were on a path to try and deal with some of the issues about the pension funding issues. This is complicated. It's going to be harder. It's probably going to extend the time that we're going to need to deal with that backlog on pensions. But we have to deal with it. We cannot get around it. We have to. Even if somehow tomorrow the clause in the Constitution went away, the unfunded pension liability is a debt that we have to pay it's a bill we have to pay. We can't just make it go away. So it's going to take us longer. We have to treat it like a mortgage. We're going to have to amortize it. And hopefully it'll have less of an impact on our budget as we move through the coming decades.
Okay, thank you. And I think one last question. So as someone who has seen our school districts develop and change over the years, what specific change would you want to see from a climate perspective, or really any perspective? So what do you feel we can do as students and teenagers in these districts, since we can't vote?
Wow. That's an interesting, I can tell you something that is different now than when I was a kid. When I was going to the local public schools, is you all travel a whole lot farther to get to school than I did, which is kind of counterintuitive, especially since there are more people living in the suburbs. But I'm a baby boomer. And I'm the tail end of the baby boomer, but I was a baby boomer, and there were, many more schools out here, a lot more kids. And I think I took a bus to school maybe a handful of times. I could always ride my bike, and I could always walk. The physical plant of schools has changed over the years. I think the schools you go to, though, are more efficient in terms of energy. One of the schools I went to was bulldozed. I went to the original Central Road, which was basically made out of cinder blocks. So I think the physical plant has gotten better. I would say probably the best thing that you can do, there isn't much the school experience is what it is. Right now we are learning remotely for other reasons. I don't think that this is a good long-term solution, even though we're probably saving on climate control in schools right now. But probably the best thing that you can do within your schools is look for educational opportunities in your own communities. And there are lots of them. I know that right now I'm on the environmental committee and in Rolling Meadows, and we are developing a relationship with Rolling Meadows High School. They have an ag program, and they are working, just before COVID hit, unfortunately, we're working with the environmental committee to use the greenhouse that they just built in conjunction with some of the educational programs they have to help us grow plants to help reseed natural areas. So there are all sorts of opportunities from an educational standpoint, is to think about the programs that you are engaged in and talk with your teachers, and good ideas can come from you. You guys are in school right now, and just if you've got an idea, approach a faculty member, approach a board member, and yes, you can approach board members and propose it. Because if you had told me that this ag program would be working out of Rolling Meadows High School when I was there in the 1970s, I never would have believed you. It would have seemed pie in the sky. But now we've got this great opportunity to help, restore wetlands areas and natural areas in the city. So.
Well, thank you so much. And before first off, thank you. You answered all our questions super thoroughly and directly, which is really refreshing and appreciated. Not a lot of politicians do it, so thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you.
And I think I can speak for the group that we all really like you, and we would all way more prefer you over Tom Morrison. So what can we do to help you get elected?
Well, thank you. I thank you for the comments, but also thank you for asking. We have had interns. I've had interns working with my campaign both in 2018 and now. It's gotten a little harder with COVID because we're not canvassing. Almost everything we're doing these days is phone banking, which I know a lot of people don't like to do. I don't like to do it, but it's what we need. We have all sorts of phone banking needs. We do what we call a general phone bank, We're also doing meet and greets online where we send out postcards to people and then phone bank those people. We call people and ask them if they need yard signs. Also, we're working with the Casten campaign on some phone banking too. So we are doing some joint work. So if you're in Sean Casten's campaign, we can make sure that you're phone banking for both of us at the same time if you want to do that. We're also working with the Sierra Club to phone bank people who have an environmental interest. So there are all sorts of opportunities. Again, because of COVID, they tend to center around phone banking. But yes, please contact me. I can put my, I'll put my webpage into the comment section here, and we have a volunteer button that you can go and click, or you can email my campaign manager. And I think my campaign manager is on the call, but I'm not sure. His name is Nathaniel Grow. And if he does, I hope he puts his email into the contact thing, the chat box too. So, but thank you. And it's a lot of fun for me to work with high school students because, you know, I grew up here. You know, I walked in some of the same buildings that you're in, and it's really cool to be able to do that.
Well, thank you very much for coming, because it is our first meeting and we were super, super happy to have you. If you ever need us to do anything for you guys, just give us a call. We're going to give you guys plenty more, I assume. So yeah, just keep in touch. Thank you so, so much for
Thank you.
doing
And
this.
put my thing in my website
Yeah.
now.
Put it in, and then y'all should click on it just so it's in a tab for you guys to look at later or now, but just so you don't lose it.
And if Nathaniel, if you are on the call, put your email address in as well. He may not be, but thank you.
Thank you. And then you're welcome to stick around. Everybody else should just 5 more minutes. I know it's getting late, guys, but just real quick, just to kind of tell you guys what our club's about.
Yeah, I'm going to take off actually, but have
Cool.
a good night.
Thank you. All right, just let me screen share. I promise you guys it's like 10 minutes. Nothing too crazy. Okay, let's see here. Bear with me. First time ever doing this. All right. So we are the D211 Democrats. It was started by Gabe, myself, Anya, and Lamia. We'll have our contact information at the end, just kind of who we are and what we're going to do. We're D211 students. We're all based out of Fremd, but any school within D211 is welcomed and appreciated. We're also associated with the 6th District Democrats. That was Patrick Watson's organization that we mentioned earlier, or he's the committee man for it. Again, we highly recommend that fellowship. We were all a part of it and we all loved it. It's a great way to get involved and help Sean Casten and Maggie Trevor and all the other local people running in our congressional district. We are also a local chapter of Illinois High School Democrats. You can look them up on Instagram at ILHSD. That'll just give you more ways to volunteer. Maggie Trevor talked about phone banking. They're a great resource for if you guys want to do that. And then what we're kind of going to be doing in this club. So first, we're going to be bringing political people and activists to speak. Basically what we did today. It's really informative. I hope you guys thought it was too. We're also going to be phone banking, and while not as fun, it is really, really important, as Maggie Trevor said. And then we're also going to be doing petitions. This is really important. The more public pressure you can put on either politicians or any major group really get stuff done. Public pressure almost always works, or at least get something moving. And then lastly is voter registration. Coming up mid-September, we're going to have more details on this. We're going to do a voter registration drive to get seniors elected. As you all know, and as Maggie Trevor mentioned, she was off by 43 votes. If we can get 50, maybe even 100 seniors to register to vote, that is enough to make the difference and get Tom Morrison out of office, which would be really, really great. And also get Sean Casten elected and beat Jean Ives, who, if you all look her up, will know what I'm talking about when I say you do not want her. Lastly, here's the ways to contact us. You can DM us at the D211 Democrats. You all probably saw the DMs that I sent to most of you, and then you can email us at the D211Democrats@gmail.com. I know I went through this super quick, so if you guys have any questions, those are great places to put it. We also have a Google form, which I think somebody is going to link down in the comment section that we would really love for you to fill out. It just sets the time. What time do we want to be meeting? That's really important. Right now, we have it scheduled for Thursday at 6 p.m. Starting September 10th. Again, that's Thursday, 6 p.m. starting September 10th. We can change that if too many people can't make it, but for now, that is the time. Again, fill out the form that's going to be put in the comment section and is also in our bio on Instagram. It really just kind of lets us know where everybody's at. And yeah, thank you guys all for coming. If you guys have any questions about the event or anything else, I'm going to stick around for a couple of minutes. If not, thank you very much, and we hope to see you guys at the next meeting.
Hi. Okay. I did stick around to ask a few questions.
Yeah, go for it.
I am from Conant, from Green Cougars. I know you guys reached out to us to join. I did come a little late. I also asked a question, which I'm very happy was asked, about like the individual level. It was for Maggie Trevor and what we can do, what our districts can do, but I was also hoping for like a more individual answer, because it's wonderful to hear about state and federal changes, but it's also a little discouraging sometimes, because I know that I have nothing to do to help with that because I can't vote. So in general, I just wanted to hear about the environmental side of what you guys are planning to do, or do you guys have an environmental club, something that we can contribute to or help out with, or maybe connect and work together on? I'm also talking really quickly. Sorry, I just drank a cup of coffee. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm in debate, happens all the time. We all talk way too fast and nobody can ever understand us. So we're good, on the same wavelength. For environmental clubs, I know, I'm not sure about Conant specifically. I know Fremd and I believe Hoffman Estates has environmental clubs. We reached out to both of those teachers. Science teachers in general are a great way to start that and to kind of start your own club, get involved there. We are trying to work closely with them and we're planning on doing a couple events with them. Also, as you kind of saw in the town hall, both of these candidates are really climate driven. You saw Sean Casten was literally on the committee. Maggie Trevor, that's literally what she's been doing. So we're trying to get them elected. And one of the best ways you can do that is to volunteer with them. We're going to be having a lot of options to do that type of volunteer work. As I mentioned in the call, we're going to have the voter registration drive coming up in mid-September. Young people tend to vote Democratic, and getting them out to vote is really, really important. It's 43 votes for Maggie Trevor. I don't know how many it's going to be for somebody else, but the more Democrats we can get out and voting, the better. And since you can't vote, since I can't vote, that's really the best way to essentially vote. You're voting through people who you got registered. And that's what we plan on doing.
Yeah.
If that answers your question at all.
It does. It's awesome to hear that you guys are planning to pursue some events on the environmental side. What I was saying, that I am from the environmental club at Conant, so we do have one.
Oh, you are? Okay. I thought, okay.
So our name is Green Cougars, which is kind of misleading because I know not everyone knows that our mascot is a cougar. But we would love to work with you guys if you'd be interested in volunteer, because there's a lot of events that we were planning to do too, but also we can't really do because of COVID. So maybe a larger organization or a bigger amount of people would be helpful and also just fun.
Yeah, hey, just send us an email on like any ideas that you guys have. We're open to do just about anything. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
If you guys have an Insta page, just put your username
chat.
in the chat, and then I'll follow you so we can open up DMs.
Yes. Okay. I think our sponsor is here. Hi, Miss Zara. I think it's green underscore cougars.
Oh no, sorry, it wasn't off mistakes. It was Conan. That's who I emailed. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Green underscore cougars. I'll also follow you in a second. So yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for answering my questions. It was a lovely meeting. And I would love to attend the next one and listen to so much more because it was really fascinating. I never got to hear firsthand from a politician before, so I loved it. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks. That's our goal. So thank you very much.
Okay. Have a nice day.
Right. You too. All right. I notice a couple more people are still here. So I know one of them is my mother. I'm not sure if she wants to stick around or if she's doing something else. Mom, Melinda, no? Okay. We're just gonna go like that. No more. Okay.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Yes. Before we end the call. Going once. Going twice. 3 times. And sold to nobody. All right.
Have a great night, y'all.
Yeah,
We hope
you
to see
too.
you next time.
Yeah. Good job to you too. Yeah.
Anya, hear me.